I'm Kim Belair. When we treat cis, hetero, male characters as the default, we still look at our core demographics and say, okay, they're white, cis, hetero males. And we cater almost exclusively to them. We've actually done this so long that what we're doing is creating an entire nation of picky babies, and they make us scared to deviate from what we actually want to do. And we cannot continue to try to create art under a system that is going to bar innovation for fear of a picky baby throwing a tantrum. And if they don't like it, we have to start thinking we're not losing, they're losing, and we're losing because we're going to let them stand in the way of our progress and our innovation.
Greetings. This is a topic I wanted to talk about for quite a while. It's something that has bothered me for honestly as long as some early 2010 media releases, both movies and games. I guess this pervasive ideology was always present, but as everybody basically already knows, it truly evolved into its current iteration in the last few years. And I would like to discuss why the intended goal of diversity and representation in modern media always seems to backfire, or do the exact opposite of what the creators hope their message will deliver. I have a few examples, both old and new, mostly from the past 10 years though. I would also like to be as neutral and polite as possible because I believe this ideology is not just ruining media for the quote-unquote normal people, it's just as well ruining the experience for all marginalized groups, and it does so at the expense of these people who are, after all, still human, kind of. And I believe especially members of marginalized groups would rather be left alone and in peace instead of being perpetually lumped into the culture war and piled on or put on pedestals or inadvertently portrayed badly and thus ridiculed by the modern media they are represented in. So, if you are a member of whatever subculture, this video is supposed to be genuine, even though I like to be edgy and I'm opinionated on this topic and I share very few empathetic views on the current zeitgeist and the political division. I want you to not immediately run away from this video. I am truly and honestly trying not to be off-putting, and I will keep the offensive shenanigans to a minimum. I will not insult or demean anyone, and I will approach this as neutral as I am able to, even though yes, I am obviously not aligned with the viewpoint of the modern left, and I don't like many of the examples I will be talking about, but I would still prefer it if you heard me out first. I think we are all worse off with the current selection of media we are being served, not just mainstream modern AAA media. Any indie project can just as well become a victim of this pervasive ideology. I think we are all worse off with the current selection of media we are being served, not just mainstream modern AAA media. Any indie project can just as well become a victim of this pervasive ideological decay if you don't have some sort of grounded approach to representation and diversity, especially if the project lead is the only one person that dictates the flow and direction of a game, a movie, a show, or any other piece of media. Let us first look at a collection of examples that highlight what exactly is going wrong when diversity, equity, and inclusion is taken to an absurd level without any oversight or care for the cohesion, story, world-building logic, and immersion of the final product. In short, how and why does representation fail in modern media and turn instead into demeaning tokenism and hollow virtue signaling? Obviously, there will be spoilers from this point on for every single piece of media that I will be talking about.
How we talk about disability in the media matters. Fair disability coverage means including people with disabilities in all kinds of stories. Persons with disabilities must appear in everyday coverage, just as journalists should always strive to represent persons of different genders, ages, races, and ethnicities. Media outlets need to have an inclusive editorial plan to expand on and improve upon coverage of issues related to disability. Disability stories exist on every subject. Media professionals need to find these stories and tell them, whilst also incorporating the views and opinions of everyone with disabilities across programming. The media has a major impact on public perception and has an important role in promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion in society.
Example number 1. Hades 2. Character designs, especially Hestia and Hephaestus, as well as ethnically changed characters for no reason, in a game that supposedly reflects old Greek mythology. Obviously, all of this can be explained by the tried and true argument of this world is just inspired by Greek mythology, nothing more. All characters inside are their own separate entity and have nothing to do with the actual gods of the Greek pantheon, nor any other historic characters and myths. I find these explanations and interpretations a little bit uninspired, as they do not convey a strong belief in your property, and at a certain point you truly have to wonder, if you could have just used completely original characters, why didn't you do so? Well, it's because modernity and progressivism in gaming aims to precisely replace virtues and established characters with their twisted interpretation of the modern ideology. It still comes across as unfathomably weak of an argument and can be used to excuse anything. Non-historic Battlefield World War II games are completely fine then. Modern God of War uses the same excuse. Any franchise accused of changing their character designs and gameplay aspects to fit the modern gaming crowd is using that excuse, and quite frankly, I think it's not earnest, and it's a cop-out to not have to deal with the consistency and the accuracy critique when covering a historic time period in a game. A certain level of abstraction is fine, but let's be honest, Zeus is supposed to be Zeus. Hermes is supposed to be the Hermes, and Athena is the Athena. These are not distinctly original characters, they are supposed to evoke the Greek gods of old ages. But that is just a minor point of gripe for Hades 2. The more interesting aspects are two distinct character designs I would like to highlight. It is very important to note that these do not detract from the fun and enjoyment of the game. At least for me they don't, but their visual appearance certainly invokes negative impressions for me, especially Hephaestus. But Hestia first. The problem I have with her design isn't just that she is a very stereotypical, overweight, incredibly weird and ugly looking black woman, it is also that they decided to give her vertigo. This to me is such a generic, virtue signaling token combination of visual traits. At least they didn't make her a sassy queen to boot. But this specific character design in black characters appears in so many different types of media over and over and over again. And especially in specific video games that fall into the extreme woke spectrum. And make no mistake, Hades 2 is woke. For all the good qualities of the game, it is undoubtedly still woke. I feel this depiction of Hestia is a disrespectful act towards people who have these visual markers, and the fact that such a character trope appears in an indie project should make you think a little bit. This means very likely there was no soulless executive from an ESG investor or a publisher present that mandated token generic black person representation. No. Someone in the development studio thought this was genuinely a good idea to make one of the most generic representations of black skin color in a game. At least you could argue her being a representation of fire might mean that this could be ash, or how coals turn white when they burn. But I doubt that this is the visual motif the developers were fully committed to. They got the fire theme down for this character, and then on top of her already tokenish appearance, they decided to give her the vertigo treatment on top of it all. It's just such a predictable, generic design, especially for a person of color. Is there nothing more interesting you could have done with the thematic elements of Hestia? Is this really everything you had? Then we have Hephaestus, and he pisses me off even more. First, we need to talk about the real counterpart from the Greek myths, as there are conflicting reports as to how and how severely and why he got disfigured. Firstly, in the stories where he is born from Hera alone, he was born deformed because she conceived him without a father. 2. In some stories where he was the son of Zeus and Hera, he was beaten into disfigurement by either Zeus or Hera or both for not being the son they wanted. Or 3rd, Ares deformed him after Hephaestus discovered Aphrodite's affair with Ares. And 4th, he was deformed in the sense that he was not perfect like the god's usual depiction. He was not brimming with muscles, tall, athletic, handsome and perfect. In some ancient depictions, he is visually shown with a clubfoot, for example. So in any way or shape, yes, he is canonically disfigured or lame or disabled, either on one foot or totally unable to walk, sometimes depicted in a golden chariot, what could have been an ancient version of a wheelchair, although there are no true historic accounts of that being what the depiction was supposed to visually represent. It is also important to note that Greek gods have physical disguises in the human world and their true perfect form. Hephaestus being depicted as lame is more symbolic of his impure nature due to his birth, more than an actual physical disability. Now that is all good and well, but in the universe of Hades 2, we have literal magic, reality-defying time manipulation, and a sort of technology which even in Hades 1, there were weapons you could consider guns. And Hephaestus himself was building these weapons, these automatons, and other inventions that, quite frankly, surpass anything ever depicted in Greek mythology. Yes, you could even critique the ancient Greek myth at this point here and argue why the hell can't an actual god circumvent a physical disability? That seems to be a weird limitation for a god, but keep in mind, these were supposed to be mythical stories. They were supposed to teach something about the world, and they were written in certain ancient times by certain people. At most, however, Hephaestus has been depicted sitting or walking with a limb and a clubfoot, not really fully disabled. In Hades 2 though, there also just basically exists automatons and robots. There are what seems to be floating devices. Most enemies and bosses seem to float too, therefore not needing legs. There is an extreme level of magical manipulation in this world, especially accessible by the gods. And again, there is literal science fiction technology in the game. So why the hell does Hephaestus have a prosthetic limb, but he still sits in a wheelchair? Not just was the original Hephaestus from mythology never depicted like that, but in the world of Hades, he could make one of the floating robot devices to move around. Hell, he could build himself bionic legs and walk normally. And in any case, he's a god. He could just not walk at all and float like some of the entities in-game can already do. He is a god after all. Why is he confined to specifically an ancient, non-autonomous, static, wheelchair-looking wheelchair with a prosthetic leg? What, is that leg non-functional? Are you telling me the master craftsman of weapons and tech, the master smith, can't build himself a better prosthetic leg? Or hell, a better wheelchair? Is he just lazy? There are disembodied sentient limbs in the game. Why doesn't he graft any of these onto his legs and controls them? See how virtue signaling like this at any cost destroys the feeling and cohesion of a usually well-crafted world? It looks so stupid and it immediately takes you out of the immersion, and it's honestly kind of just funny and a little bit sad for Hephaestus in Hades 2. Similar depictions of stereotypical black people and needless wheelchair additions exists in games like Dustborn, for example, with Psy, a character that has vertigo again, and in addition to all the other token status hallmarks, is profoundly unlikable as a character, written to be exactly this way. You truly have to wonder how far removed from reality these people who created and wrote her needed to be to make her this off-putting on purpose. In Rainbow Six Siege, we have Skopos, another ridiculous character in a wheelchair. The funny reality about this specific example is that this operator uses two bipedal walkers as proxies in battle. So you are telling me that in the Rainbow Six universe there exists technology for walking robots that can wield guns and act similar to human operators, but we do not have the technology to upgrade Skopos herself with bionic legs, so she is not bound to a wheelchair, which is a huge disadvantage in a scenario of Rainbow Six. But from what I heard though, the lore of this game seems to be profoundly broken anyway, so adding a token wheelchair-bound character wasn't too surprising. You can already see by the few examples I gave that consistent lore and immersion absolutely has no impact on these decisions. It is purely either there to virtue signal, or for whatever ideologically captured reason, it is mandated by soulless corporations to bend the knee for ESG funding.
What does respectful LGBT+ representation look like? Is this portrayal accurate? It's a portrayal that avoids stereotypes and makes sure that the character isn't defined by their sexuality or gender. Making sure that characters are not inherently bad because of their sexuality or gender. Making sure that your narrative is sympathetic to these characters. How is the narrative treating this character? What's the message the narrative is giving to the player about this character and their identity? Having other characters reveal a character's identity can be, it's just something that you want to avoid both in games and real life, making sure that you have the consent of that individual, that their identity can be openly talked about or shown. And just the best way to do that is to make sure the character is the one telling the player who they are and what their identity is. Making sure that LGBT plus identity is never the butt of a joke. You can have these characters be funny. You can have these characters make jokes, but not in a stereotypical, harmful way. If somebody has a headcanon that a character identifies a certain way or two characters have a certain kind of relationship, making sure that you respect that, because that is how that player is deciding to consume your content so that they are represented.
So, I'm non-binary. What does that mean?
Example number 2, Taash from the Veil Guard. Taash is here to mostly highlight the in-your-face preaching that characters of this type of virtue signaling usually evoke. It is not subtle, it is not ingeniously written or integrated well into a scenario. You never find out about it yourself in the story or learn in earnest from the character. No, it's always this screaming, preaching, sledgehammer through the wall approach to these topics that makes them so off-putting. These characters only resonate with other human beings that are already social and political activists. It only resonates within a pre-established echo chamber, and it does not capture the interest or empathy of normal people. That is just the result of yelling racist, sexist, homophobic at people. Nobody cares about top surgery scars in the character creator, only the people whose minds are already engrossed and captured by the progressive cult. Nobody else cares or asked for this. In any case, to most generic human beings, it might come across as rather off-putting and strange at the best of times, especially when it is in a game where it is not time period appropriate that these modern political virtue signaling attempts would exist. It usually ends up in the writers having to change established lore or explaining everything away with magic or some other similarly ridiculous non-argument. If anything is justifiable in lore through just quote-unquote magic, why not just summon a modern tank or a nuclear strike to the battlefield in your medieval high fantasy action role-playing game? I mean, it's magic, why not? Not to mention, Taash is once again purposefully written to be annoying, brutish, boorish, and generally stupid. And she was beaten with the ugly stick too, although a lot of it is due to how her race is depicted in Veilguard. Either way, she is not very pretty, she is not very pleasant, but at least you could have written her to be more of a pleasing character personality. But again, the goal was for the writers to speak through the character, not let the character speak for themselves and maybe establish themselves fully as an individual before dropping identity statements. You can write characters like that, and it can work out. Indeed, it could end up being a shockingly good type of subtle representation, but subtlety is lost on the politically captured cult. And if you have writers whose only calling card in life is to inject their own political messaging into media they create to feel good about themselves and to get praised, then you will never end up with a good, positive or endearing character archetype. The approach itself to the character writing is corrupted, and corrupted art never is endearing or resonates. Only if your mind is already corrupted as well to perceive reality on the same wavelength as the writers or artists already do themselves. And finally, it is very, and I'm honest here, it is very hard to make non-binary characters understandable, appealing, empathetic, especially if nothing about them is explained, laid out, expressed, and explored in an earnest way. Just blurting out, "I'm non-binary," at best causes mild confusion in those hearing it, and at worst causes you to be labeled something rather unflattering. Characters like this, if and only if the writer actually means to truly write an endearing and empathetic archetype, need to be handled really fucking well for this to work out. This is also really excessively rare. I, off the top of my head, only know one singular piece of media that actually has a resonating, empathetic, and most importantly, well-written depiction of a non-binary character that is not just a token character or some sort of self-insert. Why is that the case? Well, a non-binary is excessively hard to realize in a story because even in reality, most people do not fully understand or accept this mindset or identity, me personally included. I'm still highly skeptical and honestly confused about it most of the time, even though I try to understand it. It just comes across as incredibly privileged, a childish attitude rather than anything akin to gender confusion, dysmorphia, or other phenomena that are at least easier to explain and to rationalize. So when tackling such a highly controversial and quite frankly awfully explored topic, you have to be an excellent, outstanding writer to capitalize on it. And let's be honest, most of the modern writers for these intellectual properties are anything but talented, unfortunately. And additionally, I also don't like the butchering of the English language to fit a specific identitarian movement. They is not a singular descriptor. It is used for a multitude, which also usually I think leads to these false assumptions about non-binary people being mentally disturbed or having multiple personality disorder. So I think the pronouns being they, it doesn't really help at all in this situation, in my opinion. And also, to get back on track, Taash's voice acting isn't really all too inspiring either. Almost like the actress too didn't really care about the character she was portraying.
Why does representation matter? It matters because imagine that you've never heard of a trans person in either a positive or negative way, and you see a show that has a trans character, and they are well written and respected by the writers of that show. You'll probably come away from that with a positive connection to the word trans. It matters because when a trans person gets to see themselves represented in media, when anyone gets to see themselves represented in media, it can make them feel validated and supported. It matters because there might be someone out there who doesn't yet know that they're trans. I really doubt that you would intentionally write a harmful stereotype into your story, but you might do it accidentally just because they've been in media you watched or read or absorbed in any way, shape, or form. So when writing a trans character or any character from a marginalized community, be careful not to accidentally lean into any harmful tropes and stereotypes.
Three. Jax from the amazing Digital Circus. Jax has been announced as canonically being trans, posthumously after the show has ended. Not only is that pulling a literal J.K. Rowling on a character, J.K. Rowling being a person this side of politics actively despises, it is also a sign of poor writing, or at least a show of indecision to fully commit on the story. Of course, with the creator of the show being trans themselves, it does end up making sense from a meta perspective. Also, there are other characters in the show that have identity issues and are not happy with their body and appearance, so the trans-coded influence was inherent to the show from the very beginning. But doing a post-ending confirmation feels hollow, cheap, and quite honestly just a lame cop-out. And honestly, it makes me think the project wasn't fully realized and written to its full conclusion. Maybe more episodes would have been in order, maybe don't have a single mind, write and direct everything. There's a reason you sometimes need a voice on your shoulder to direct and equal out your writing decisions every now and then. Not that I would ever condone executive studio meddling, but consulting maybe other writers, not putting all of the weight of the entire show solely on one person's shoulders to write the entire thing might have been an idea worth considering. Now that's besides the point of what the implication of Jax being trans brings to the table. As you might know, the character is not quite endearing or empathetic. Quite honestly, I think he is at least some sort of secondary antagonist most of the time, and it gets very difficult to feel sorry for the guy if you realize how he went about dealing with issues and what he thinks and sometimes does to the other members of the circus who are just as stuck in there as he is. It's a very selfish, unlikable, honestly outright negative and sometimes straight up evil character archetype, all the while being represented as this tortured soul and slowly but surely being developed into the primary protagonist until the final episode is basically mostly about him. And after all that negative impression, after the show is over and done with, Jax turns out to be trans. Thus, a representation of the trans community. Or at least that is how it works, right? Isn't that what people want in media when they ask for representation? Well, I guess in this case, be careful what you wish for. A very unlikable, outright villainous, selfish character not only takes over the actual protagonist of the show, but you're also supposed to feel bad for the guy at the end, and he's also trans on top of all of this. And to make it even worse, Jax most definitely is the self-insert for Gooseworks, the creator of the show. This is all but confirmed. So the creators self-inserted themselves into this character archetype, identifying with this character to the point where they made him posthumously trans to, I don't even know, appease someone, feel good about themselves, or to just get it over with. Whatever the reason might have been, it is not reflecting well back onto Gooseworks themselves, nor is it a flattering representation of the trans community. I get it. It's just one character, and maybe the trans community doesn't even claim Jax to be one of their own. But again, this is how representation supposedly works in the eyes of the politically captured activists. This is how you get your message out, how you become part of the greater media landscape. You insert character tropes. Only though, if a representation ends up inadvertently casting a very negative light on your subculture or your social group, only then, all of a sudden, are you not claiming it anymore. I don't know. I'm afraid this is not how this works out. It's either or. Either none of it is representative of the greater overarching identity group, or it is. And taking all of the creators' weird quirks and quite frankly strange kinks into mind, it looks worse and worse and worse the more you look into it. And in the end, what did it even bring you? There's more division, more anger, more critique, and more people unhappy with the ending of the show and getting lumped in with a character like Jax. Truthfully, I believe a trans person would likely not enjoy being represented by this specific character, or at least I think so. Usually being represented through a wholly negative depiction of your identity, that's probably not something that should fill you with pride unless you yourself are a bad person. In the same vein, but to a lesser extent, is the situation with Hell of a Boss and Husband Hotel. A series, or two seriouses, I actually tolerate to a certain extent. Before we knew what heaven looked like, it was a tad bit silly that hell seemed to be filled with literally just gay, trans and neurodiverse people. Which, yes, that might be biblically accurate, but the impression this could give to some individuals is likely not what the creator of the show intended. And it is exactly this effect I'm talking about when I mention identity capture and empty virtue signaling. You are not aware of what message you might end up sending if all you aim for is to deliver some sort of political message, to scream into the void, to quote unquote stand up against oppression. You might end up demeaning and ridiculing the very same people you are trying to stand up for in the first place, identifying them with literal demons from hell. The self-insert epidemic is a problem in general, with Mary Jane being another popular example, although we have no official confirmation that this is a self-insert, but still. Look at the writer, look at Mary Jane, look at the character designs. It's awfully convenient. In this case, it seems to be specifically a prevailing issue with primarily female writers, but let's not be too sexist here. I have seen plenty of male writers self-inserting them into horribly written woke caricatures of themselves without really noticing what that does to them and the characters that they wrote. Relationships seem to be another issue that is negatively affected by token writing and identity captured art. There can't just be two good friends anymore. Everything has this sexualization undertone and this safe horniness to it. Same with the safe edginess that annoys me to no end. Humor suffers from these writing tropes in the same way. It's also generic, safe, round, and non-specific. Nothing really stands out. I get it. Gooning is a popular thing now. Now that we all have less restricted lives and we have the first world privilege of free expression, but sometimes, just sometimes, I think we can tone it down a bit. Not every story between two close male friends is some sort of gay romance. It is asinine seeing people still declare to this day that Sam and Frodo were secretly gay. No, they were not. Do you honestly think a highly religious guy like Tolkien would ever even underhandedly write something like that? They are close friends. Something, I guess, this generation of writers and theorizers does not experience anymore. You know, genuine close friendships without instantly devolving into smut.
I'm Kim Belair. In my circles, I'm largely considered, I think, a relatively nice person. We are doing something good. We are writers and designers of tremendous skill and tremendous experience, and we've never censored anything, nor have we ever wanted to. Frankly, representation is not censorship, it is innovation. Diversity in narrative makes things more intense. It can make it more visceral and more real. It doesn't have to always make something more wholesome or softer. I really do believe that by opening up to new perspectives, by getting folks in the room, we actually push more boundaries and we get more real. They will claim that you are rich, that you are backed by, shadowy cabals, government orgs. They claim you have the ability to force their favorite studios to bend to your whim, rather than the truth, which is that studios and teams hire us to make stories better. Not woker, but actually better.
Example number 4. The all-gender Dead Space bathrooms. This is a more far-fetched esoteric example, but one I wanted to talk about for a long while nonetheless, as this is a prime case study about what empty, hollow virtue signaling does to a serious, well-written, dark and horrible setting such as the Dead Space universe. Now, let's get immersed for a moment. Who built the Ishimura? It was built by the Concordance Extraction Corporation, a company that is largely controlled by their majority stakeholders, the Church of Unitology, to the point where there are regular power struggles between Earth government and Unitology over the control of the corporation, a company that itself is already corrupt. And I quote, "CEC apparently has no qualms about partaking in illegal mining operations, and it is noted that the doomed Aegis 7 planet crack, which resulted in the accidental uncovering of Marker 3A, was not the first of the company's unlawful activities, and all outcries are swiftly silenced by their deep pockets." The CEC Executive Director of Colonial Mining Operations Warren Eckert was also responsible for swapping out much of the crew of the Ishimura with Unitologists just prior to the ship being dispatched to Aegis 7. So, in short, an evil, corrupt company. Who captains the ship and makes up a large part of the crew of the Ishimura? Benjamin Mathias and a large collection of Unitologists. Benjamin as the captain, himself being a church zealot, and we all know what the Church of Unitology is. So in short, the Ishimura was commissioned by a corrupt company, partially in cahoots with a literal cult. Then it was sent on a mission manned with cultists on board. And that cult and company apparently put a lot of effort into having many diverse posters on the wall, as well as making all gender bathrooms. Almost like maybe it makes sense for an evil, corrupt corporation and a cult to try and get already cultish and identity captured individuals to sign up for this mission and to join in on the Ishimura's crew. Maybe this was directly done on purpose to speak to these people, specifically as both Unitology and the CEC knew that they could likely easily control already mentally compromised individuals to join up with an actual cult. Keep in mind, not all the crew was Unitologists. Some likely signed up out of their own will. And I guess the CEC put those propaganda posters and bathrooms up to attract a specific crowd of individuals. You know, the culture warrior crowd maybe. The exact people cult tactics like this could work on, as they are arguably already in a cult. Interesting how that works out. Now, besides this funny excursion, do you think that this was the intended effect these changes in the remake were supposed to evoke? No, of course not. It was just supposed to be an empty, hollow nod towards identity shenanigans and an act of mindless virtue signaling. But it ends up fitting so well with the established lore. The literal demon-infested ship, full of cultists and built by a corrupt mega corporation, has the sensible diversity-approved posters on the wall and all gender bathrooms. Because of course, a cult and a mega corporation would exactly do these things to to attract useful idiots. Also, a corpse hanging in the all-gender bathrooms, that's not very tactful. And that is what happens with your attempts at virtue signaling if you don't integrate them well into your setting or story. Sometimes it might just work out in a hilariously dark and unintended way, just as in Dead Space. But most of the time it falls flat and misses the mark of what the original message was supposed to be. And between all of this and the ongoing stereotyping and tokenizing of primarily black characters, it looks quite grim for modern media, whether it is mainstream or indie. So how do you end up with writers who think that creating a black character without the father figure that has authority issues, is loud and brash, racist towards white people and a destitute, that's a fine character? How do you get to equations that black people are literally just like orcs? How does someone make a statement like that and genuinely means it and then also exclaims that they are not the racist person in the room? Well,
I'm a producer at Bungie and one of the co-founding members of the Bungie Diversity Committee and former lead of Xbox Women in Gaming. And we're here today to talk to you about how you can foster diversity in games.
I'm Elaine Chase. I'm the Vice President of Global Brand Strategy and Marketing for Wizards of the Coast. I lead the Magic the Gathering business there.
I'm Mary Olson. I'm the Executive Producer of the Internal Game Development Team at 343. We make Halo.
I'm Leah Hoyer. I am the Vice President of Creative at Telltale Games.
Hi, I'm Joy Lau. Hi, people in the corner. I am a test engineer at Bungie and also a co-founding member of the Bungie Diversity Committee. And before I worked in games, I was a professor in the philosophy of race and gender at Virginia Tech.
Women.
No, seriously. It's not just women destroying the writing of modern video games though. It's not that easy. A large portion of it comes down to diversity hires and forced quotas within these development studios and a continued push for ESG-approved story writing with sensibility training and consultants. But a large part what drives the same movement in the indie space is what is commonly known as identity capture, a part or at least a function of a legitimate cult, a topic I find very interesting. Essentially, your whole being and self becomes part of your echo chamber, your culture warrior group, to the point where you cannot even rationalize opposing views anymore. Ask yourself this: why do some people respond to opposing views by going outright feral, non-verbal, and resulting to just literally screaming at you or beating you up? Why is there not even an attempt at rationalization or a counter-argument? Why isn't there anything like that? It's because they literally cannot mentally or physically do it anymore. They are immersed in their own world, a bubble of systemic racism, of dictator Trump, a reality of virtue and white saviors caring for all the poor black people, the neurodivergent and the sad little marginalized groups. And the only correct thing to do here is to just keep putting these identities up on a pedestal, parade them around and push them onto each and every other human being, whether they want it or not. There isn't even a question about right or wrong anymore. There is only one way to do it. And this is all due to political capture and compromised minds, corruption. It is due to the urge to send a message, no matter how empty that message is. That is why you see flags being raised in profile pictures. It is just saying something. It is screaming out into the world, wanting to be heard, wanting to do some good without actually getting your hands dirty, feeling good about the deed and the virtue on display. And it always ends up inadvertently ruining the stories these people write and are involved in, as there is no thought put in as to how to actually integrate the political message into the story or world building. There needs to be shoehorned lore explanations, PR statements, or in the worst case, you get literally just told to shut up and accept it. It destroys immersion. It takes the fun away. It is a dismissive action towards those that are of that specific marginalized identity or group. And these people don't even realize what they are doing to the people that they should be protecting. In the end, these writers and creators come across as the real transphobic ones, as the real racist, as the truly homophobic individuals. And this either happens to full emotional, mental and political capture of the mind, in short, brainwashing, or it it is a huge misunderstanding of the actual message that these characters and writing tropes send out, or it is done with the full knowledge of the consequences. And then, at that point, you have to ask yourself, at which point are these people just controlled opposition to their own progressive movement? Because it does only damage their image. This is how you get insane double standards that only go one way. Only cultural blackwashing is acceptable, not the opposite. If putting a generic European white dude into an African tribe movie for cultural diversity's sake is seen as racist, then what is the opposite by that logic? That is why stories written with only political messaging in mind always fall apart at the slightest bit of scrutiny. Cultural revisionism is also prominent within these projects, as well as historic revisionism. It's fully destroying the immersion of any story and media. Only female gooning is acceptable, not the opposite. A tale as old as feminism. Every gender should be entitled to equal opportunity gooning. That at least would be true equality. None of these individuals truly think racism or misandry is actually a deplorable thing, especially if they can utilize it for their own goals. And if you happen to be a person of color or a non-standard sexual preference and you deviate from their playbook, you are immediately ostracized from their cult. There's also a very disappointing disregard for actually disabled people within these groups. They are either put on a pedestal unwillingly, or they are ignored if they cannot be utilized to push an agenda, and just kind of thrown away. Now, is there a good and a positive example of representation out there? Let's end this video on a high note.
I love life very much. And it's been said that I can't possibly love life, that I'm a very unhappy man, or must be a very unhappy man. And I would say that I'm a very happy man, an extremely happy man.
A good example of representation I always like to highlight is Olivia Holford from I, Wani, Hug That Gator. And no, it's not because she also happens to be a scaly. If you played the game, which I will not spoil here, as it is a very amazingly written story, you will find out through trial and errors what a actually well-written disabled character can be. The game is a visual novel and is primarily driven by your player agency and choice. That means you can make good and bad decisions that will affect the primary characters, both the protagonist and the love interest, as well as the ending. The love interest in this case being the Gator. The game very decisively highlights how elevating, babying and taking agency away from disabled people just because you want to feel virtuous and great about yourself leads to absolute disaster. Olivia's whole characterization in the game is all about self-agency and wanting to be independent and being taken seriously, to wanting to being more than just a girl in a wheelchair. Even though she has that disability, the disadvantage, she wants to be treated as an actual living being, not a token or an object to be manipulated for social virtue points. And doing the right thing in this game is difficult, and it means you have to give her agency, it means you have to let her fail, and it means you have to not play the hero, the savior for the poor girl in the wheelchair. And that is what good writing is. That is what good representation is actually about. Showcasing actual characters with motivations and goals, not just broken down to just their identity or their physical disabilities. Characters with their own wills and agencies, not just tokens and self-inserts. That is when stories are immersive, emotionally enriching, and that is when characters are endearing. And the funny thing about this game in question is, it was written by a bunch of guys on 4chan. Yep, a bunch of 4chan guys can write a better progressive character with a disability than all of the overpaid modern audience writers in the AAA development studios combined. That should tell you something. That should tell you how wrong and how bad it's going in the industry. The first game these 4 channels made, by the way, is similarly well written, and I can only always recommend you play both of these games. They are a great example of actually good character writing. And I'm not kidding you, this is not a troll or something, this is real. This is real. But for someone whose identity was fully captured and devoured by the cult of modernity, writing an actual character that resonates with a broad range of human beings is a foreign concept. As we all know, evil can never create, it can only corrupt. I feel like more people need to read the Silmarillion. Melkor's fall from grace, his motivations and his perspective on the world of Ardar is a very important learning experience for certain individuals. If you're too lazy to read it, just get the audiobook then. I believe this is truly Tolkien's best work. So hey, looks like there's something positive you can take away from this video. Go play Wani, go play Snoot Game, and read the Silmarillion. These are actually good types of media to consume. And with that, I am done. See you next time.
The trouble with loyalty to a cause is that the cause will always betray you.
This transgressive behavior is part of the all-out assault on Western categories of thought. The whole purpose of categorization is for exclusion. Categorization is the basis of cognition. Thought itself is an agent of oppression. As the politically correct movement inches forward, there's always a vulnerable group that they're using as a just like the terrorists do in the Middle East, you know, they'll surround their hideout with women and children, so that if you bomb the hideout, you kill these innocent people. Well, the social justice warrior types do exactly the same thing. They find a hypothetically vulnerable group, it doesn't matter what it is, and then they use them as a protective shield while they move incrementally forward. So if you object, then immediately you're targeted as someone who's picking on the poor, vulnerable people.